A Nut and a Scout's Eager Sword. Alvin pensively waited for the chaos to end. Bricks, shingles, and mortar had been strewn about the city, shattered apart by the arrival of the Titans. He hadn't seen Theodore since he left their cottage, nestled against the once safe inner wall of Maria. He watched, though, as the once safe streets of the town had been disrupted for the first time in his life. The tall, naked, and though disproportionate, still sensual forms of the Titans moved slowly now through the city, having had their fill, their skin bare, hairless, warm, and steamy. Alvin wondered what it felt like, for though the terror and adrenaline filled his heart, the arousal within him from their naked forms brought him a shivering from within his loins. Perhaps it was the fact that he knew little of what skin-on-skin contact had felt like, his fur being a barrier to that yearning. He listened, standing within the gutter of his shattered home. The oppressive realization of Simon and Theodore having vanished swept over him, but with what he had seen since his childhood, he was little fazed. It was survival, which was his only instinct. Click, click. Alvin felt the roof give way just beside him, as a pair of glossy boots landed beside where he stood and just to his rear. He looked at the towering figure, one which stood with majesty, blocking the sun's rays from touching Alvin's supple, eager body. The figure looked down, his hair long on top, buzzed on the side, the bangs bordering a youthful and handsome face upon which two tired eyes gazed. Alvin returned his head to the streets, and with no indication of how, the Titans before him had begun to collapse, the nape of their necks exhausting warm mist and exposing their moist openings. It was at this point that Alvin had realized he was standing not in the midst of just any man, but a legend on the fields, Levi Ackerman. Levi shuddered, and just as the dozen Titans before had, fell to his knees, revealing an open wound on his back. Alvin gasped. A tiny squeak that escaped his breath echoed through the air. He pensively bent over, sniffed his neck. The pheromones that left the collar that wrapped around Levi's muscular neck. Shivers quaked across his body, his loins feeling much different than before. Levi turned his head, eyes fluttering open, to a ready and willing rodent beside him. Though it was rarely the case, for once he was the taller of the two, though not by much, and much promise was to be had in the nourishment of Alvin. As he closed his eyes and succumbed to his injuries, the feeling of small paws and tawny claws made their way around his collar, preparing to haul him to safety. Levi bit his lip in pleasure for each little scratch that the nails made before slipping into slumber. "You're going to have to lift your head, pal," said a squeaky voice in Levi's ear. He felt shivers down his body as the warm breath of Alvin's request made his way from his ear to his neck and down to his bare chest, only obfuscated from the light by bandages which ranged from his chest to his hip. Alvin began to walk down the length of Levi's body, his hand gently stroking his pectoral, letting the nails drag in an almost purposefully provocative way. Levi felt not pain or frustration, however, but instead an arousal which filled his chest like a volcano waiting to erupt. As Alvin approached the other side of his small chipmunk hole, closing the door, a breeze swept through the room, and Levi could feel the cool air caress his entire body. "Wait, my pants!" Levi thought, jerking up to check himself. He realized quickly he had been stripped entirely naked by the hospitable yet curious chipmunk that sheltered him. His sight moved across his bare, chiseled, and hairless abdomen to his waist, where a halfway erect member sat over his left leg, then finally to Alvin, who gazed with blushed cheeks across Levi's naked form. He averted his gaze from Levi's slowly growing cock and made his way to the edge of the domicile, where a stand sat ready with a Victrola bird recorder. Alvin, still averting his gaze, broke the silence. "Do you like music?" he squeaked. Levi slowly nodded his head, but never smiled. "Nando Fukushima Naruto Uzumaki Honda," he said, assuring that Alvin would be fine to turn on the music. He let out an embarrassed smile, placing a record on the player. Levi listened to the muted bass, its gradient picking up and filling the room. This music was not made with instruments, none that he knew at least, but vaguely remembered hearing it once before. Alvin chuckled as the tune of Party Rock Anthem filled the room, delighting their ears. Alvin made his way to the side of the bed, bobbing his head to the music with anticipation, keeping Levi's erect member in his periphery. Finally, the best quieted, and Alvin's heart dropped as he laid down the first lyrics. Party rockers in the house. No, Levi interrupted. It's Party Rock is. There was a silence. Awkward, but one that had left Levi's smooth voice echoing in Alvin's head, driving him to pure animalistic lust. Alvin grabbed Levi's head, to which Levi himself reciprocated, pulling each other close as Levi's tongue invaded Alvin's oral orifice, dancing with Alvy's tongue, the smell of chipmunk musk rubbing off on his freshly shaved face. The whiskers from Alvin's petite nose tickled Levi's cheekbone, sending a tingling sensation from his face that he could feel just above his rear. Levi could feel something warm, somewhat dry, but covered in soft fur grasped his fully erect mast. "Nani!" Levi gasped, to which Alvin backed from his mouth and stared wide-eyed into Levi's own eyes. The quiet lasted all of 2 seconds, as the man before Alvin nodded. "Rowdy, Suzuki, oh my! Wamo Shindiro Kawasaki Super Shock Dirt Bike. Gojira, Kino Notabi," Levi said, assuring Alvin to continue. The furry hand began to stroke the length of his cock, the fur gently touching his sensitive testicles that bunched just beneath, sending chills up Levi's abdomen. Quickly the pace hastened, his paw gliding as each hair flitted against Levi's soft foreskin. Levi let out a gentle moan before pulling Alvin even closer. The chipmunk lifted his leg up and rested it before the resting table between Levi's naked legs. Levi groaned as Alvin's hand departed his cock, leaving it exposed to a cold breeze that swept from under Alvin. He lifted his long red shirt, adorned with his trademark letter A, revealing a small rodent cock of his own, red and peeking from the fur like a fence post in a field of bountiful wheat. Levi looked puzzled and tilted his head. Alvin reached down and held his hand under his nutsack, waiting. "What's wrong?" Alvin asked, his squeaking voice dragging by seductively as Levi waited for him to continue. Alvin's hand moved around his groin, cradling himself, but still Levi could not figure out what he was doing. "Nagato nendo boko no piko, konami hayo Miyazaki," he said, seductively eyeing Alvin's bright red chipcock. "Kendo shuzu wendigo katana, ana no miso amane." "Oh, let me show you," Alvin said, pulling his fingers away. Levi heard a small pop as his small hand bounced downward, and there, hanging from his fingernails, the stem atop an acorn which had dropped from his ready and wet anus. Levi wondered to himself, was he just waiting for this? Will I fit? I am, of course, a human, though small, and he is a chipmunk, though large. I cannot squander this, as I've never failed to divide flesh with my sword before. I won't waste the opportunity to do it now. Alvin began to squat over his large human schmeat, pressing his tiny chipmunk anus around the head, his sphincter grasping it tightly, yet able to let it slip by from the moisture that had collected. Alvin released a small squeak as the head popped in, giving way to the skin. He stopped and hesitated, though Levi placed his finger over Alvin's mouth to stop him from continuing to let out his high-pitched moan. "Shinichiro Watanabe, no. Shingeki, no. Kyojin, watashi wa natsu no hana," Levi whispered before pushing his member deep into Alvin's quivering asshole. He let out another squeak as Levi pressed his meat into his innards, and it could be felt in the chipmunk's stomach. Alas, this was a once-in-a-lifetime experience that Alvin could not miss out on, and this... He stood up, clenching his sphincter around Levi before slamming down again. Levi grabbed Alvin's feet and held them against the table as he thrust upward, nearly pulling Alvin's rear end out at every pull from his hole and pushing in with immense force, the likes of which only the Titans had ever seen. Levi stayed silent, gritting his teeth as he power-thrusted his way into his furry friend. My chipmunk... my chipwreck my asshole," Alvin squeaked. "Put your nuts inside me." Levi pushed forward, hand against Alvin's chest, and forced him backwards onto his back, tipping them both in the process. Alvin his puppet upon Levi's love finger. Levi thrusted harder, tugging Alvin's feet in as he was straddled to the table like a horseman of the ass-pocalypse, pushing into Alvin's rear with an intense force that nearly knocked him from the table. Levi began to moan, feeling himself approaching climax. Higurashi no naku koro ni, Nico, Duga, yaoi hentai senpai, he yelled as his cock throbbed. The squeaking intensified, though often Levi could tell no difference between the table's rocking creaks and the stifled yelping of his chipmunk love slave. He grasped Alvin's hips, cock wet from the sweat and juices, and spun him around without strain, his muscles flexing and gleaming in the light as he moved Alvin onto his belly. The rodent struggled, pulling himself to his knees. His own chipmunk member was throbbing as well, swollen from the lust. Levi began to thrust his blade into Alvin's slot once more, and in a matter of seconds released his seed into Alvin's rear. Another spray of chipmunk splattered against the wall. Another spray of chip spunk splattered against the wall. Another spray of chip spunk splattered against the table as Alvin blushed in ecstasy before sliding from Levi and falling onto the table. There was a silence as he heaved on the wooden surface, satisfied from the stuffing. He felt internally, as a taxidermy trophy, gamed from the woods of chance and conquered by a hunter who used his shot to deliver the killing blow. Levi bent over, gripping his pants, which lay upon the dimly lit room's floor. Opai chin wasabi calamari doki doki litra klabaru, Alvin senpai? Levi asked stoically as he turned, parting his hair back away from his face. Alvin slowly glanced to his lover, waiting for him to continue his words. Levi smiled and headed towards the window where his gear sat in wait. Each belt rested upon its place, with purpose. His clothes slipped over his warm, sweaty, and muscular body. Wordlessly, Alvin watched in wonder as he gently pushed open the window with his small yet powerful hands. With everything having returned to his form, Alvin finally responded to his question. Levi, what did you want to tell me? Alvin asked, awaiting his proposal to become an eternal love mate. He smiled, something rarely seen upon his face. Tashibo, kamikaze, namikaze. Ciao, Roberto, he said, before the hooked wires burst from his gear and, tugging his body, tossed him through the window, only to disappear into the evening sky. Alvin let out a sigh, knowing there would be more Titans to kill, and he may never come back. But his last words echoed in his head. Ciao, Roberto. Alvin lay in the dark, a cum-covered heap, before whispering to himself one more time. Yeah, my home is pretty messy.